dinosaur. That's rude. We are live. It's 7:57, so I'm about an hour late from normal. But today I want to talk about horsepower kits. And the thumbnail that I have up, that one was originally, I don't even think that's available anymore. That one was originally from a Holly, the guys at Holly. So these kinds of like horsepower kits, if you will, on that one was a small block Chevy, but it had, heads, cam, intake. And then in that particular one, it had a bunch of other stuff too. So it had lots of small things, head gaskets and head studs, and what they're thinking, excuse me, what they're thinking is that not only are we get to give you the big part. So if we look at it, and that's kind of the part that I'm interested in. I'm more interested in the power, and the heads, cam, and intake is a big thing in power production. I call those the big three. Those are the things that really make a difference in power. Things like rod ratio and things like that. Those aren't part of the list. The list is heads, cam, and intake manifold. Displacement's good, compression's good. All those. There are some other big things too, but the heads, cam, and intake manifold determine the power, and also like the power curve. Like where does it make power? So does it make 400 foot-pounds of torque? Does it do that at 3,000 RPM? Does it make that at 6,000 RPM? Because those are going to be different things. So those things work together. You have to have enough head flow to support the power output. The camshaft and the intake manifold, I would argue, get together to try to optimize power in a given RPM range. You want a bigger cam with more duration to be more effective at the top with a single plane style manifold. And then for a dual plane, you want a different kind of camshaft to be optimized. Same thing with like when we're talking about LS stuff, our low buck truck camshaft at richardholderperformance.com. That works really well with your typical kind of long runner manifold, the early truck manifold, the Trailblazer SS, a fast manifold. But it's not something I would team up with a BTR Trinity manifold or a Holly low ram, maybe even a high ram. I have run cams like that with high rams because as a little side note, because people ask about that. Well, can I combine a camshaft that makes low speed power and an intake manifold that makes top end power that have the best of both worlds? No, you're not going to have the best of both worlds. You're only going to have part of each one of those, and it's not going to be the best part. But it can be done. But normally what you do is like for that kind of camshaft, most guys are looking for average power production 6,500 or lower, and then the motor that you put that on also, whether it's a 4.8 or 5.3 or 6.0 or 6.2, I guess you could put it in a 7-liter. It would not be the cam that I would recommend for that. But if you put it in any of the others, on the bigger motors, it's going to make power at a lower engine speed, peak power basically, compared to some of the others. But that's the important thing here. And the reason that I want to talk about this is guys have sold these kinds of kits before. This one's from Holly. Edelbrock is famous for this. Like you get the Performer, the RPM, and then the Victor Jr., basically good, better, best, at least in terms of peak power. Because honestly, I would argue in those, the middle one is almost always the best one. A Performer RPM air gap, like for most small block Chevys, small block Fords, big blocks, you can argue a little differently for the big block stuff. But for most street applications, a good high-rise RPM air gap dual plane, really hard to beat for 90% of the people and 90% of the RPM range, the effective RPM range where you're going to be running. You want to do a tunnel ram, a single plane, make power at a higher engine speed, then obviously you have to put an intake manifold on a camshaft accordingly. But for the vast majority of people, that's the kind of thing. That's why we sell, like for the LS applications, that's why we sell low buck truck camshafts, and even the Truck Plus, which is one step above that. But I'm not doing camshafts for 7,500, 8,000 RPM, because it's just not as you go up in RPM, I think you go down in the number of people that would be actually interested in that. You go down in the marketability of that kind of thing, because I just don't think that there's as many customers for that kind of thing. But it's important to match these combinations. And the cool thing about some of these, and this is what I want to ask you guys, the cool thing about some of these kits is that they do this for you. So you would hope, and this is generally the case. I've tested a lot of these different ones, and what they do, they're good about putting these things together, testing them on the dyno, and go, okay, well, this one does this. It makes, powered on the Edelbrock stuff, for instance, makes power. The Performer kit makes power down lower, and it's a milder camshaft, and it's a Performer intake manifold, and it's a stock or ASCAS set of heads, and then it makes peak power at like 5,000 or 5,200 RPM or something. And then you step up to the next one, the RPM, then that one makes power at 6,000 or something. And then the other one, it makes 10 or 20 more horsepower. It's a single plane manifold. It's got bigger heads. It's got a much bigger camshaft. But if you compare those two, there's always going to be trade-offs. And that's the thing, that even if you're, and this is one of the difficult parts of choosing this stuff, and why a lot of people, and I go through these because guys ask me these questions, and it's hard for me to steer them in the right direction because it's a subjective thing. So if we pick a combination that makes a lot of peak power and it trades a bunch of power down low, and all you do is start this thing up and warm it up and power brake it or two-step it or put it up on the converter and run it up the track, and you have a big stall converter, then that's perfect. That's all that you're doing with it. It's just a track car, and that's all that you do with it, and it works fine. If you have that same combination, what makes that same kind of power, but you have that in something that you also that you drive on a daily basis or even on a semi-regular basis, your experience with that will be different, because you're using, even though it's the same power curve, you're using the lower portion of the power curve now way more than you're using the good part of the power curve up where it's going through when you're drag racing. And so even though the power curve is the same, your usage for that power curve is different. So do you now you're only getting to enjoy it, where you're going, wow, 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 from 5,000 to 7,000 or whatever. You only get to do that. And you're not gonna be able to do it that often in the street. And you're not gonna be able to do it that often in the street in all the gears like you do at the drag strip. So you just don't get to use that very much. So you get to use that now 5% of the time or 10% of the time, but the other 90% you're using the area where it's not that great. It's a single plane manifold. It's a big camshaft, unless you have a big stall converter on it or whatever, and lots of gear in it. It's just not as much fun to drive around. And then therein that's the rub. There's the rub. And that's the thing is, how much do you drive it? And then how much do you use this part of it, the top end part of it? And how much do you use the other part of it? Even if you like that curve and I want top end and I'm all about the big end, even if you want that, how much of that are you using? And so then the decision is, well, what if I could have a whole bunch more in the 90% range where I'm using it all the time, and I would have less here, and maybe when I went to the track, I wouldn't be as happy because it's going to be half second slower or whatever. But for 90% of the time that I'm driving around, I'm going to be happy because it has a lot more torque and it has much better average power production, and it's just going to be funner to drive. That's where we take the dual plane manifold and put the spacer on it and put 100 shot on it or whatever and take it to the drag strip and do that. So you can solve that problem. But again, that's just like this best cam scenario, or even picking turbos and stuff. What's the best turbo? What's the best camshaft? That's why you don't know. Even if those two guys want the same like peak power, one of those guys is going to be really happy because he's drag racing it all the time. The other guy's not going to be happy. He's going to hate it because he's driving around with it all the time and it's super laggy. I know I felt exactly that way. And I'm a dyno guy, so I like the power curves. But when we put the Extreme Energy 274 non-PI camshaft in my Mustang, now it had, I don't know, 273 or 308 gears or whatever in it. But when we did the all motor build up on the non-PI motor, and we put those camshafts in it, it made more peak power. And after 4,000 or 4,500, it made more power. And by a good bit, like 20 or 30, it was quite a bit. But it was terrible to drive around in because now it made less power than the stock cam did through most of the curve where you're driving it. So you go to stomp on the gas at 2,000 RPM or 2,500 or 3,000, where you would be doing it, more on a daily basis. The thing just, it was just a slug. It was awful. And so for driving around, that would not be a trade-off that I would want. I would have definitely picked, in that case, the smaller cam, the 262 cams probably, for driving around. when we put the Kenny Bell on it, that solved all the low speed power problems that we had. We had enough to spin the tires and do all kinds of fun stuff then, and that cured it. But driving around with just a cami, loud, ported headed 2-valve engine was just not, that made less power than the stock one up to 4,000 RPM or whatever. It was just not a good choice. It was not fun. And so, but the question is, for all of this is, even if you have to pick that, even if you have to decide, okay, look, I want a, low, medium, and big kind of camshaft or combination. Do you guys like those? Like, do you guys like when people offer these kind of combinations? Do you like when they put these horsepower kits together that have heads, cam, and intake, and in this case, like the one that we're showing, that also have, gaskets and head studs and various valve covered gaskets, and sometimes in the case of the trick flow guys, because they do really good stuff, they have in some of their kits, they have like roller rockers. If it's a small block Ford kit or a small block Chevy kit, they have roller rockers, and you could even get carburetors and distributors and things like that. So if somebody had a kit and made it easy for you and said, hey, look, you got a small block Chevy and you want to make 400 horsepower. Here's the thing that makes 400 horsepower. Here's the one that makes 450. And here's the one that makes 500. That's a 383. But here's the one that makes 500. Do you like that? Do you like them having set all of that up for you and it's ready to go, and you know what it'll make? Or do you like just doing it yourself? In fact, that will be our poll here. Okay, would you choose a complete horsepower kit that's ready to go over picking the parts yourself? So are you hey, it's a ready to go kit, or are you, I'm just doing my own things where I can decide? I'll just go ask Richard which one of these works, and he probably has dyno tested it. There's pluses and minuses on both sides. I mean, obviously, the Edelbrock guys, Trick Flow guys, guys that have put together these kits have them, and they've sold really well. And for a lot of guys that maybe don't have as much of a handle on, how these things go together, what cam should I pick, what head should I pick, how much power can this make with this intake manifold or this carburetor or whatever. One group of people it's really good for, because they don't know if I take the stock small block Chevy heads off and a Q-jet intake manifold or a 2-barrel intake manifold and a stock cam out and put this stuff on, they don't know what it'll do, because it being a 212 218 cam means nothing to them. They don't understand that because they don't have any experience with it. We're all like that. If I go look at some other industry, like I don't know what this doesn't mean anything to me. So I understand that. And that way, for those guys, hey, look, you want 400 horsepower? Look, do this, and it's 400 horsepower. The next group of guys are like, okay, that's 400. What if they're the what if guys? What if I picked a bigger camshaft? What if I had ported heads or milled heads? What if I had a single plane, or I put a spacer on the dual plane? They're all the what if guys. The guys that should be looking at the next kit up or whatever. They just want to make this one, but they want their 400 to be 410 or 420. They want to make that kit as good as the next one, usually for less money and stuff. But that all happens. But the kit stuff is interesting. We're thinking about putting together different, and we've put together different assemblies for the store, for richardholderperformance.com, where we have, turbo and injectors and things that will go together. And I think that's helpful. So get guys steered in the right direction. But I just don't know how complete, people want stuff, because I don't know how many people are in the just hand it to me. Just give me the link. And then the rest of them that are like not link people. Untrue, Jordan, Jet, Surfer Jag, what's going on? Best stage cam for an LS3. what you got to tell me what kind of power you're trying to make and what you're trying to achieve. Out on a rig again, but this one actually has okay internet. So are you on an oil rig? Pertinent, what's going on? Steve Martin. Whales is in the house. Kits can be a good idea for a lot of people if it's a proven combination. And a lot of those, like the Edelbrock stuff, like the Trick Flow stuff, like the Holly stuff that I showed, those were dyno proven, and so they do what they say. I have to get a kit. I don't have any fabrication skills. Kits are good, proven, and easy to install. DIY, on the other hand, can be much more satisfying if the work is done right. It is. Doing it yourself can also be a learning experience where you put together stuff and it didn't work out as well as you thought. But that's good. That's you've become, more educated. That's good. Best cam DoD delete for an L99. Again, got to tell me what your definition of best is. Ever have trouble with Holly EFI? Can't get the Dominator to read map, oil, or fuel pressure. I'll say high error, harness test okay for 5-volt signal ground, and Holly asked for it back for testing. We haven't had that happen. I was wondering what I have to worry about piston to valve clearance on a 6-liter, 706 heads, 231 cam. It's close enough to where you should definitely have to check it, but I think it'll fit. You know who has some great videos on proven combinations? Richard Holder guy. Nitro engine only lasts 5 passes, but it will be awesome. Our stage 2 cams for daily drivers for an LS3. Is it a manual trans? You need blowers and cam kits for LQ4s and trucks. They're everywhere. How much power would you be leaving on the table if you run a low lift cam versus a high lift cam on CNC ported heads on an LT62? See a 540 versus a 640. Figure if I'm porting, go with more lift. I don't know where you have that option to have the same cam minus just the lift. The tests that we've done on changes in lift have not been like that. They've been 500 versus 550. And it was 6 horsepower on that test. 1106 from Ohio. Horsepower kits. Is an Edelbrock AVS 650 sufficient for a bone stock 30 over 78 Pontiac 400? Yeah, for a stock one, I think it is. If it's a low 78 is going to be a low compression. Yeah, I think you're fine. Big thing around my neck of the woods of people pulling cheap LS engines from the junkyard, either nitrous or boost them until they blow and swap in another cheap one. You need a guy like you for transmissions and a guy for differentials. Most people should be buying a package as they really don't understand how bad the streetability of other parts choices will be, and then add in most people can't afford what they're trying to do. There is some of that, and I think, like we talked about with the drivability portion, I think guys learned that they try to get, well, if I just got, what if I got a little bit tighter LSA, or what if I got a little bit more duration? Can I get away with that? I don't know. What's your definition of it's good or it's not good? Been thinking about going and taking a course at UTI. Yep. The best combos have been in the stock rev ranges. If you got the Moxie for high lift, short duration cams and boosts have served quite well. Downside, it hammers the valve train. Yeah, high lift, short duration stuff is a really aggressive ramp rate. Those don't usually RPM very well. They can have bounce and stuff and problematic areas. Do I need to replace the springs, and what duration of lift is needed for a Truck Norris cam? I don't know what you mean by what duration of lift, but you do need springs for a Truck Norris cam, and they have springs to go with that cam. They're $79. The guys at BTR have stuff ready to go for that. You can buy a cam and springs. You can get those from our site also because we're a BTR dealer. That's Richard Holdner Performance.com. The Trek Norse cam is a good cam. You'll be happy with that, and just get the right springs with it. Like I said earlier, proven combo kits are fantastic and usually a decent deal compared to buying everything separately. There is something to be said about building a motor yourself. I'd take a kit from someone that knows more about it than me. Yeah, and that's usually the case. If guys have put together kits and tested them, it should do what they say. I mean, it's not that hard to put those kits together and then run them on the dyno and go, hey, look, with this head and this cam, we took this motor, this head, this cam, this intake manifold, and put that on there, and it made this much power. That's essentially what I've been doing for the last 30 years. But these guys are packaging them together and selling them as complete deals. Diablo Sandwich said Dr. Pepper. Sheriff B for T Justice. If you do a 500 horsepower kit for an LS3, I'd buy it. Well, since an LS3 already makes $495 at the flywheel, you're already there. Match top end kit for a junkyard engine with expected results. Yeah, I have a lot of that stuff for junkyard motors. Kits usually include pieces that are forgotten or complete assemblies for repair, but even if it's not, one click to select, just having a list of a reference to go by. I agree. I do like the complete kits that have all of the stuff that, like, hey, this is what you need to bolt on these cylinder heads or this intake manifold or whatever. Because what will happen is you'll go to put it on and you have taken all your stuff apart and you're putting it back together and you're like, oh yeah, I don't have this. I need this. And then you have to go to the auto parts store. And I hate that. I have to do that a bunch when we're doing blower stuff with pulleys and stuff. I said no because I've enjoyed educating myself. There you go. On my third motor because I want to do it myself. All of that's good. Just had to do a wheel bearing job on my Avalanche. Heat is your best friend. Fire for the win. Did it loosen it up? Were you able to get it out? I'd like to avoid coil bind and valve collision. That's not good. 86 Buick L99 swap. 2013 Camaro Shorty Harris trying to make 500. Yeah, that's easy. Are you trying to make 500 wheel horsepower or 500 flywheel horsepower? Because an LS3, when all of the crate LS3s that we've run with headers on them, they'll go 490, 495. When you're tuning a multi-part injection setup, do you check each cylinder with an O2 sensor or just assume that they are the same? We do both. Most of the time, we just run one on one bank of header. We also will sometimes switch that to the other header to make sure that the sides are same. Westech has set up to run 802s, but the 802s have nothing really to do with tuning. I mean, tuning can cure that, but it has more to do with usually the intake design. The intake manifold decides whether or not all of the cylinders get even airflow and all of the different forms of charge filling that are associated with intake manifold design. So it determines whether or not each of the cylinders makes the same amount of power and therefore needs the same amount of fuel. At what point would you recommend upgrading to a 105 throttle body from a 92? I would recommend doing that when you have a 102 throttle opening on your intake manifold. I'll put together my own combo. Thank you. I have the Edelbrock kit and my 93 Lightning, but I did swap out the heads for AFR Enforcer heads. I don't feel like the advertised 450 horsepower, though I altered the combo. Yeah, but if you replaced Edelbrock heads for AFR heads, you probably stepped up. I need to do my own list before I can pick and mix. Yeah, see, this is, let's see if you can focus in on that. Yeah. Kind of see, there you go. That is my list of, that's my test regimen for the sprint. That's what I do. When I'm getting ready to go to sleep, I sit there and think about, okay, what am I going to test? What is going to be my sequence of testing? What am I going to do first? Okay, we're going to do this and then this and this and this and this. And then when I do it, I have a listing of all of the things that are going to remain stock and then the things that are going to change. And so I have little check boxes of okay, for this test, all of these things are stock, and here's the one thing that we changed. And then the next one is like, okay, we're changing this, and then blah, 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 blah. And then we put the new ECU on, put the Haltech on there, and then the new turbo and the new header and E85, and we're going to try to run methanol on it too. So, and an intercooler and yada, 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 all kinds of stuff. Thinner head gasket can increase the compression. Yep. When I upgraded my OG 5-liter, I did not do a package. I picked a good set of heads from AFR, good, Comp 274 cam, and a trick flow track heat with a bigger throttle body. There you go. All of those work. My problem is little gaskets, bolt sensors, O-rings. Either they don't come with the new piece or they're supposed to come with the other piece in the original motor. That's one of the reasons that I like to go to the wrecking yard and get complete motors, because it has all the stuff. I don't have to worry about sensors or wires or spark plugs or any of that stuff. It's all there. It's like a ready to run motor. You want to make 500 wheel horsepower with an LS3? That's going to be hard to do. I started building a small block Chevy back in 62. Sure wish I had all this information. Lots of trial and error, yeah. And in 62, if you were building it in 62, there was much less available for it then. I've got a set of 799 heads, small cracks between the seats. My budget is tight. What would you do? I've run lots of heads that have cracks in between those. BTR sold the cam and K1 cranking rods with Wiseco pistons and got the valves and springs from Texas Speed. He knew with some other mods, it would be around 700 wheel horsepower. Ended up 715 wheel horsepower. What was that on? You asked last night about my LQ4 swap into a 67 Camaro, 308 gear, and a 4065. Okay. Came with an LQ4 from the junkyard. Wondering how those two parts will hold up to an LQ4. The 4065 would be my worry. The rear end is not, I'm not worried. I wouldn't be worried about that. So even if you have a multi MPI intake and turbo setup, you could still have lean cylinders. Yeah, you can. It's possible. If you run, for instance, if you were to run, we did a bunch of testing on blow through stuff. But even if you had port injection, which I did a test where we ran a single plane intake manifold. We ran a carburetor on it, and we ran 802s on it, and then we ran port injection on it. Individual cylinder port injection with batch fire, and then we ran it with sequential, and then we ran it with sequential. Adjusting the optimizing, making the same air fuel for all of the cylinders. The manifold itself does not have that when you run it. Doesn't matter whether you run it with a carburetor or port injection, it does not have that. The intake manifold, the runners are different, the entries, the lengths, all of that stuff is different. So every cylinder wants a different amount of fuel, and that varies through the RPM range. So the carburetor actually does a decent job of that, because the fuel flow, the fuel demand by the motor is dictated by these things happening in the intake manifold. So the amount that it draws in, there's some of that going on, but it's not ideal. The only way to get that actually is to individually tune each cylinder. And it wasn't worth very much power, but it was worth quite a bit of safety though. When you put big, I'm sure you mean big valves in a 706 head. Will that help? Will that help low compression? I don't know what you mean. You can put bigger valves in 706 heads. They will flow more if you do that. You got to cut the seat properly for the bigger valve. Guys put the 799 or 243 valves in there. When you do a full-on 706 ported, polished, you go even bigger valves. Like the guys at Total Engine Airflow that do those kinds of kits. But if you're taking 706 heads, and I think that this is what you mean, and putting them on a 6-liter, it will increase the compression. Got to get back to work. We replaced bike fairings. Okay. Oh, racked up on your ZIL 1. Okay. I was going to say that's got to be, that sounds like supercharged motor numbers. Depending on the manufacturer, sometimes it doesn't even have the O-ring. You have to physically order every single piece individually. Speaking of rear ends, I've got an 81 Corvette. I'm going to do a swap on, hoping to make 450 at the crank. Do you think a Dana 44 stock will hold up? Yeah, the rear ends I'm not too worried about unless you're doing, drag strip launches, and even then, well, like with an automatic, it's not nearly as bad as trying to do a stick launch with slicks. That's when you really load rear ends. We did a bore and stroke and BTR put the kit together for us. Yeah, they're really good over there. Brian he's a sharp dude. I know that he's not doing all of that. You're talking to some other people, but they've been doing it a long time, and they know what works and they know what makes power. I like going there and doing stuff on their dyno with them. It was a lot of fun going over and doing doing the moonshine test where we ran the motor on moonshine. I'm looking at building a 351, but all the kits are for roller cams. So I'll have to convert my 70s block to new roller lifters, or you just get a roller block, or you can go with a less expensive flat tappet cam, because that's a way to go also. There are concerns about flat tappet cams, so I just don't know if that's going to be. I myself would do hydraulic roller stuff anymore. I know it's more expensive, but that's what I would do. I would just get a hydraulic roller block. I'd just start with a hydraulic roller 351 from the wrecking yard. They're inexpensive, especially if you just buy a short block or just a block. But just get a short block, because you don't want the heads, you don't want the intake manifold, you don't want valve covers, you don't want any of that stuff. Just get a short block. That should be pretty inexpensive. Just find the right one. What's the best intake for an LS1 intake for a low budget power F stage 2 camshaft headers? I don't know what year LS1 you have. If you have a later LS1, it would have come with an LS6 intake manifold. If it does have that, that's a really good one. If you have an LS1 intake manifold, that's not good. The LS6 is good. The Dorman stuff is good. The Fast is the best one for that kind of combination. Looking for a cam for my F-body, 6-speed. 416, 64cc, big heads, Mamo ported. Be around 11-1, E85, D1X. So Tony didn't recommend a camshaft for that? Is it going to be a drag race thing? Is it going to be a street car? What is it going to be? I'm guessing from the combination that it's not going to be a street car. On the asymmetrical setup, did the exhaust valve get swapped out on the head on the Sprint? Pertinent. I don't know what you're referring to there. The asymmetrical turbo, we didn't do any exhaust valve changes. And you want to put an M90 on the Sprint? No, we're not going to do that. Although I might run a supercharger on the Sprint at Bonneville for one of the classes. We might do a supercharger and a turbo. How to build a 400 horsepower 5.3 for daily use. And also, I'm living in a hot area. I reached 55 degrees in the summer. Are you talking about 55 Celsius? And a 400 horsepower 5.3 is just one of my low buck truck cams and springs and injectors and a tune. That's it. That's all it takes. In fact, that's going to be 415 or 420. Is 55 degrees C? I don't know how hot that is. Uh, 131. Wow, that is really hot. I get that vet together. If I can make 450 crank, what do you think I'll see at the wheels? This is my first time. I don't remember agent. I don't remember what the transmission that you said that you had. Figure it's going to be 100 horsepower loss, something like that. Oh, Kuwait, yeah, that would be hot. I have friends that worked over there for quite a while, and I thought that he was telling me that, and I don't know if he was just kidding. He said the thermometers only go to 125 because they don't want you knowing that it goes over that. Oh, it's 125 today. Yeah. I think you'd have more fun at Bonneville running a 410 Sprinter than a 1 liter Sprint. Nope, absolutely not. Don't want to have anything to do with that. A Sprinter van would be cool, but I have lots of records that I want to set with the Sprint Turbo. And somebody just reached out, a gentleman from Canada that I'm going to try to speak to tomorrow, and another guy is going to take a look at some Sprints tomorrow, I think locally here. So in Sacramento, although the guy's asking a fortune for some of the stuff. One of them is really nice. I would like to have it just to drive it around. It's like that nice. I think it has Panasports on it, so it's like the right kind of thing. It's really hard not to want that. I'm in Arizona, so heat is coming. Yeah, Arizona's not 130 hot though, because it gets over 100 a lot here, but not like that. I was always told that the valves have to be changed on a turbo application. The exhaust valves is what you're talking about? None of the things that we've run on the dyno have valves changed. If I was running at Bonneville, which we will, I probably will put different valves in it because it'll be running sustained, but not for a turbo LS. It's a 3-speed, but I'm hoping to swap for a manual Tremec, not decided on a 5-speed or 6-speed. Agent, I have I think it's a TKO trans, a 5-speed. Would you recommend swapping a 4L60 to a T56 transmission or just getting the automatic built? I like manual transmissions for these things. I like them because they're easy to test and they lose less power. And a 4L60 is going to be hard to get it to live for power. TSP stage 3 low lift truck cam, 216, 220. Versus a low buck truck cam. Which one is better? I've never tried that camshaft. That's bigger than that's a little bigger than a low buck truck camshaft is. But I would be surprised if that, given how close the split is, I'd be surprised if that makes, I don't know. I don't think that will make the low speed power or the top end of the low buck truck cam. And also that cam is going to be $100 more than a low buck truck camshaft. I don't miss Kuwait or Iraq for the heat. A Sprinter van. If there was a line of cars going all the way down the world, there'd be some clown in a Sprinter van pulling out to pass everyone. Yeah. Sprinter vans are cool. A Sprinter van would be cool to use to tow the Metro out there or the Sprint out there. Sodium valves, love boost. No, I think I would do Inconel valves for the exhaust. Commented on the last video about building an LQ9 twin turbo, 700, 800 wheel, street weekend, forged pistons, low buck truck cam. What do you think about the rest? I would do a single turbo and I would do a G42 for that. I wouldn't use the twin 3584s that we have. I would use something smaller. We're looking into 3076s, which might be good for that. GTX versions, though. Dual 660 springs. You know, I wouldn't put 660 springs on a low buck truck camshaft. I would go with less spring than that. You're over-springing it. 4L60 versus 4L85 on a supercharged 4.8. I don't know about what a 4L85 is. 4L80, I know what that is. Now that you're selling a newer impeller, could you test them against some of the higher dollar Garrett or Precision turbos of the same? We did. We ran a bunch of Precisions on this. We ran a 7675 and a S369, I think. Asher, thank you very much. Budgetary restraints are going to force me to see how long the 4L65 will last. Will a Corvette servo help or hurt? No, I think it'll help. I think anything that you could do to get the thing to shift a little bit quicker is better. Think it'd be worth switching to a single exhaust to a true dual exhaust for power gain? How much would you expect to gain? It depends on what the power level of the motor is. The higher the power output of the motor, and then also it depends on what the single exhaust is. If it's like two 2.5s into a 3, if it's two 2.5s into a 2, how do they merge? All of that stuff. How does the low buck truck cam compare to the truck Norris? Very, very comparable power curves. Would you do the DOD and AFM delete on the L99 for a swap or just leave it? I wouldn't run those unless you're just running it all stock with a stock computer and stuff. I wouldn't run those. I need small turbos for a 6.7 liter Jaguar build. I scored a 6 liter crankshaft cheap. The other stuff got booted back. A 6.7 liter Jag? Are you running the Jag motor or is this a swap motor? What spring would you recommend? Yeah, I would put the low buck truck cam and spring kit in. Can valve springs significantly affect power by being stiffer? Yeah, if you add a bunch of spring rate, you can lose a little bit of power. It's not going to be dramatic, but it's not going to add any power unless it has cured a valve float issue. If you cure a valve float issue, but usually just more spring rate will do that a little bit, but not, you need the right spring frequency. But if you cure valve float, you can make a big difference in power. It could be 100 horsepower or more. Overbuilt, what's going on? Kits are great, but I also like learning what's needed. There we go. 416 stroker, L92 heads, 11 to 1, 11.5 to 1 fast. Okay, 248 cam. It's a big cam. I don't know, mid 600s, I think. I just watched it might be more than that. I just watched a single plane field distribution test you did. I'm surprised how different the cylinders were. Would you actually tune a streetcar to make all the cylinders even? I don't know, because the problem is most streetcars are not going to be hooked up so that you can run 802s. Now, you could do it the low buck way and have O2 bungs put in all the cylinders, in all the headers, not run 8 of them. You could run 1 in each one and run them on the dyno or at the street or on the street or whatever. You could log that. And then if you have the air fuel curves, you could see if you can adjust your tune individually for cylinders. I don't know if you could do that on the factory ECU. If you can, adjust them individually so that it makes them right. What most people do is add a bunch of fuel so that your leanest cylinder is fixed, and then the other ones are just end up making less power. Can you test the Mad Max cam from Texas Speed? I don't have any of those. Cornelius, thank you. Any chance of a Ford version of the low buck truck? We're talking about that stuff. What's the best value rotating assembly for a small block Chevy? The one that came with it. If you want to make 500 horsepower, you just leave the stuff that's in there and then just do heads, cam, and intake. Or if you want to make a 383, there's lots of good stuff. Scat has good stuff. Race Tech has good stuff. Summit has good stuff. None of that is, none of that will stop you from making the power. 228, 232, 110. That's not the cam I would pick for a 5.3 unless I was trying to make power, more toward the top of the RPM range. It's not a cam I would pick for a street 5.3. It's way bigger than I would want. Windsor is a waste without heads and intake manifold. Best cam for a stock bottom end 4.8 turbo build. There is no best cam. You got to tell me what you're trying to do with it. How much power are you trying to make? What turbo are you using? Are you driving this around? Do you want it to have, are you using a stock converter? Are you using an automatic? What are the other things that are going to dictate the kind of cam that you want? Because the cam doesn't decide how much power the turbo combination is going to make. The turbo does that. So to give you an idea, if you put a 1,000 horsepower turbo on your 4.8, it could make 1,000 horsepower. And it could make 1,000 horsepower with 1,000 different cam profiles. The turbo is going to make sure that it makes 1,000 horsepower because that's what it'll support. But you could do that with one of my low buck truck camshafts. You could do that with a bigger camshaft. You could do it with a medium-sized camshaft. The camshaft is just going to dictate how much boost response you have. And on a 4.8, that's important, especially for something that's street driving. I would pick a smaller cam for a street strip 4.8. How much base timing and total time would you run on a 5.3 LM with a truck Norris? The camshaft doesn't care about timing. The timing is dictated by the piston and the combustion chamber. So the timing that we run on LSs on a truck Norris cam is the same as the timing that we run on a LS9 camshaft or a stock LM7 camshaft or a 459 comp camshaft or a BTR, stage 4 LS3 camshaft. All of that's the same. For us, we run on the dyno because we're running them cold. They usually make best power at the horsepower peak of 29 or 30 degrees. And the base timing doesn't matter for us. The base timing is just what we put in so the thing will start up and idle. But 10, 15, whatever is all fine. Any 85 test plan? I've run lots of E85 tests. Those videos are up. If I build the same engine, you build it before 5 years, is it safe to add it? If your question is it safe to add 150 horsepower to a 400 horsepower 5.3, yes, it is. As long as you put ring gap in it. Is 600 or 615 too big for a 6-liter? Would you have any vacuum and idle issues for drivability? The lift has nothing to do with idle vacuum. That's going to be the other valve events that are happening in the thing. It's going to be duration and LSA. And like I said, the actual valve events are going to dictate what the idle vacuum is. And then the size of the motor. A 6-liter is a good start. Got to get to bed, wake up at 5 a.m. There you go. Oil rigging. Be careful out there. What makes a cam sound choppy? Valve events. Richard, I'm running the V12. Very cool. I like it. Jaguar stuff. 5.3 liter, 90 millimeter bore, 70 millimeter stroke. About a 6-liter crankshaft. Okay, so stroker. Boring into 370. Okay, cool. And then how much power are you wanting to make on that? Have you ever measured exhaust gas temperature on your tests? Yeah, a lot. We normally do that on NA motors and not on turbo motors, but I don't think we've measured EGT on the turbo stuff. The EGT is not as critical for us as that just tells us that the cylinder is working and that they're all working, somewhat evenly, but it doesn't tell us about the tune really. Did sound on this build, so I need 2 turbos for the build. Okay. Yeah, just tell me what kind of power you want, and then we'll. Hey, happy to help. Kuwait. I like people from all over the world. That's awesome. What's the approximate max compression you can run NA with methanol, and what stops you from running more? Is it knock? There is no maximum compression that you can run on methanol. Not realistically, because you just can't get that high. You can't make a combustion chamber small enough and a piston dome big enough to have to worry about that on any sort of typical kind of, like on a 6-liter. You're just not going to get that combination where that's going to be an issue. And for now, just NA with flex fuel, probably boost it later, but the trans and diff are only good for 700 foot-pounds. 6-speed manual. Sure, 600 max should be good. 410 NA. Yeah, a 6-speed manual is good. If I get to bed right now, I'll be getting back up in 15 minutes. Kits are usually subpar power-wise and cut corners on gaskets. It doesn't change the fact that Hector is going to be running 3 spoon engines. Hector bought spoon engines, man. He bought kits. He literally bought spoon kits. I source a stock down pipe set and a merge pipe for my Boss 290. It'll be NA to get it running at first. So I can use the thing, but it'll be a single turbo. Stock parts, 3584, 50 millimeter wastegate. There you go. You'll be all set. Any time frame on asymmetrical turbo with a supercharger on a stand? I don't know what you're asking. Did anybody ever say that they were going to run an asymmetrical turbo? I assume you're talking about the one-sided turbo blowing into a blower or something. I don't ever remember talking about that. Some manufacturers only have the part number for the kit, not the part number for individual parts in the kit. Yeah, probably because they don't want you piecing it together and finding out how much each thing cost. And them doing all the work and doing all the dyno testing and stuff, it has value. I mean, it's worthwhile. If you had to go piece all of that stuff together and then put it on the dyno and run it, it's expensive. It's not cheap. I want a stock LQ4 to run stock RPM and a small turbo to make diesel torque. Too much to ask for, though. It's not, but you just can't have the thing make 10 or 15 or 20 pounds of boost at 2,000 RPM. The motor wasn't designed for that. I think Bro's looking for a G42 and a 3584 on each side. Sounds laggy. Need more Gen 3 Hemi content. Yeah, I agree. Love to see the different Eagle heads and pre-Eagle stuff. Yeah, I haven't done any of that. I haven't put the later heads on the earlier stuff. The old Ford Mustang EV1 type 4-hole injectors are an easy upgrade on the Jaguar. Yeah, I mean, I think any injector is going to work. It depends. That's really going to be the plug style is just going to be a function of what harness you're using. But it's just going to be a height thing for whatever fuel rail you're using. Sometimes piecing the kit together can be cheaper. How does advanced timing on a cam like a 114+4 affect or benefit performance? Well, if you're advancing the intake center line, you're changing the valve events by doing that because you're changing the cam relative to the piston position. And so you're just altering the valve events. There is no absolute like advancing that adds more low speed torque or whatever any more than advancing a cam. It doesn't do that. It doesn't do that always. What they found, hopefully, when they were testing that, is that the camshaft that they did liked to be in that position. And even and then with that, if they tested that and found that out, it more than likely, if it added somewhere, it took something else somewhere else away, because that's normally how it happens. Very rarely do you do something and have it be better everywhere. And sometimes you can do that for a little bit, but after a while, after you really start zeroing in on stuff, it becomes a trade thing. And then it's like the thing that we were talking about. Well, which one of those things on the trade do you like more? We've rocked it a little bit. It made 5 more on the top and 5 less on the bottom. It's the same in the middle. It's all the same. Which one of those do you like? Like if we look at the 459 and the 469 cam, that's exactly what happened. One of them made a little bit more on the top. One of them made a little bit more on the bottom. Otherwise, they were exactly the same. They were an overlay. Which one of those is better? I don't know. Honestly, I don't think you see a difference in acceleration between either one of them. But, somebody may pick the one, somebody may pick the other. Would adding a turbo for 100 to 200 more horsepower affect longevity too much for it to be a long-lasting daily driver? Well, I don't know what you're adding that to. Are you adding that to a motor that's only making 100 horsepower? Then, yeah, I would say it's probably going to hurt longevity. If you're adding it to a motor that makes 300 or 400 horsepower already, that's not very much. And the difference between 100 and 200 would be different. And also, is the thing like just adding the power from the turbo is not going to hurt reliability that much. If you have the thing tuned properly and you're using the boost not all the time where you're just beating on the car. If you're beating it all the time, that's going to hurt reliability. And then also the thing to think about is, are you really going to have this thing on there for 2 or 3 or 4 or 500,000 miles? The answer in almost every case is no, you're not going to have that for that long. You just will get tired of it and change it and do something else. What do you think keeps the stock rings from kissing on a stock? I don't know what plus turbo means. Well, we know it does that. If the rings don't butt together, you either already have enough ring gap or you didn't put enough heat in the ring to make them pinch together. I'm looking for ways to not have to add 802 bungs, honestly, mostly because I'm running factory exhaust manifolds. I think I'll run it rich. Well, and do you know what it is right now? Just with each side, is it rich? Is it lean? What is it right now? You just don't know because you put twin gates on a V8 turbo setup, but have the second gate vent one entire bank, so it's basically uses both to get it up. I don't understand what you're saying, Nathan. So you want to have the spool up of having all of the exhaust, if I understand this, you want to have the spool up of all the exhaust energy going to the turbo, so it spools up, and then vent all of one side, so that then you have an asymmetrical turbo. That's not going to work. A wastegate is not going to vent entirely one side. It could vent some of it, maybe. Running 1960 to 81 six-cylinder international truck engine. Very nice. Very other guys. Truck weight is 3.5 tons, 140 horsepower. Draw through turbo, set at 8 pounds, 600 Holley, 62 main, 71 secondary. So is that working right now, Trevor? Because that's a good application then. Do you ever degree cams you test on the dyno? No, we normally just install them. Our 6L90 snapped 456 input shaft at 690 foot-pounds. That used to be the hardest thing for customers to understand. Development time, testing, administration to get a product to market or develop a kit all cost time and money. Yeah, they don't. Most of the time, Neil, I'm sure you know, they just look at the cost of it. They're like, oh, that shouldn't cost that much. Okay, well, here you go develop that and see what it is. What temp thermostat would you recommend for a turbo LS, street driven car, stock bottom end? I think I'd run 180, because if you run too low, your fuel mileage is going to suffer. Building a 5.3 and wanting to drive before turbo, would it be bad to drive with bigger injectors now, or just wait until I get the turbo to get the bigger injectors? The bigger injectors don't do anything, because you're not going to be, if you have it tuned so the big injectors supply the required amount of fuel for the NA motor, which they have to do even once it's turbocharged. You have to have it tuned, and then the big injectors are just acting like smaller injectors. Big injectors don't always squirt more fuel. the computer tells them how much to supply. On a 5.4, I know some people degree the cams have a closer LSA, which from your test makes more torque and makes it sound choppier. On the 4-valve stuff, particularly the modular stuff, degreeing the cams is a good idea, because they could be off from side to side on the modular Fords. I'll be getting a fuel rail extrusion off of eBay. The question, I get this question a lot about the LSA stuff. Do you degree the cams? The problem with factory cam gears is that you're not going to be able to adjust it 1 or 2 degrees. It doesn't make any difference. It goes in the way that it goes in. And then are you going to degree out the slop in the chain that every LS has? It's not going to happen. 505 big block, 10.5 to 1, 540 horsepower. What turbos do you get to 1200 to 1500? Would like to use a blow through an E85. 1200 and 1500 are different things. I don't know. I'm initially thinking that 2 of the 38 or 3584s will get you to 1600, but they will do 1200 really well on that big block. 1500, I don't know that they'll get there on something that big. Is it a fuel pressure ratio issue? My Fox, when I roll on the gas, pulls like a freight train, but when I punch it all at once, it doesn't pull as hard. That's not a fuel pressure issue. That's a tuning issue. Trevor, it's working good now. A draw through turbo is a cool thing. It has all the cooling, has all the chill, has all the chill factor. I think Nathan wants sequential turbos. He could use a couple of e-throttles to shut off the one turbo and route the exhaust through the other. He wants to do sequential turbos. Does running the turbo off of one bank make more power than running it off of both? Does the open header bank take more timing? Overall, more power, but harder on the other side of parts. We didn't do timing on one side or the other. We didn't look at that. The only time that running the turbo off of one side would make more power at the same boost level is if you had a reduction in back pressure, which you could have. So there could be more power that way. Thoughts on stroker motors with NOS versus turbo stroker motors? There's no difference. A stroker motor, whether it's NA, whether it has nitrous on it, whether it has a turbo on it or a blower on it, the stroker motor versus a smaller motor, it's bigger so that it makes more power. And so it's just a starting point where you're starting out making more power. And then if you add nitrous to it, you started out making more, you end up making more. Because if you add 100 horsepower with a nitrous on a 400 horsepower motor, you get 500. If you add it to a 600 horsepower stroker, you get 700. So same thing with the turbo. The turbo spool up faster with bigger motors. Initial timing, 10 degrees, 32 degrees, no vacuum advance. Okay. A 5.3, you grind out or down the keyway notch on the cam sprocket. Yeah, and some of them don't have them. But if they do have them, you get rid of that. You just have to be careful when you're tightening the bolt down that you don't spin the cam. Does lift on a cam affect horsepower? Yes, it can. You're Ashlyn, you're doing something that has a 666 lift. That's a lot. Would you choose a complete horsepower kit? 62% are saying yes, and we have one more minute. Yeah, and Ashlyn, I don't know what that lift is that you're saying. Is that with the 1.8 rocker that an LS7 has, or is that with a 1.7? What power adder would you recommend for price to power on a daily driver LS1 engine build, turbo or nitrous? Those just do different things. A nitrous is not something you're going to use all the time. A turbo you use all the time. If you just buy it, nitrous is probably going to be less than a turbo. But again, you can't enjoy it all the time. You're not going to be wah 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 wah. You're going to be doing that with a turbo a lot. With nitrous, you're not going to be doing that because you'll go through the bottle really fast. At what point would you be worried about you didn't have enough timing? I wouldn't worry about that. But you could look at EGTs and that will tell you the EGTs start to get really hot if you don't have enough timing in it. But watch your knock counts and see. Yes, with 1.8, but I'm going to run 1.7s. You're going to run a 1.7 on your LS7? 1.7 rockers? How are you going to do that? Because an LS7 rocker is different than all the other rockers. Lifeline packs don't mean to derail the chat. Well, this is question and answer, so everything goes. I have a C can of Mark 1 G10s, G10 Canadian models, parts and research. I reached out on Facebook. Yeah, I sent you. Is this Morgan? If it's Morgan, yeah, I sent you an email back, and I'm going to be giving you a call tomorrow because I'm looking to buy a Sprint Turbo. Does a stock HO cam react better to? So I will give you a call tomorrow. I just thought it was too late to be calling tonight. Does a stock HO cam and a Fox react better to nitrous or blower? It reacts exactly the same to both. The camshaft makes this amount of power, and then when you add nitrous, like you add 100 shot, it adds 100. When you add a blower, depending on the boost level, it just adds that. It doesn't respond better one or the other. It's just a cam. They don't do that. Stock LS3 rocker is the same as an LS1, 2, 6. Only LS7 is 1.8. Yeah, the LS3 has an offset rocker, but the ratios are all 1.7s on those motors. On an LS3 416, but their cam I bought was for an LS7. Okay, yeah, that if you have a LS3 head, then you're good. I thought that you had an LS7 head. It's Morgan. Sounds great. Saw you on live. Had to drop in. Yeah, I will give you a call. Just let me know. And I don't know if you're up now and you want me to give you a call. I can give you a call as soon as we're done with this, which is like in 1 minute. I just didn't know if it was too late. Any plans for a Big Bang Bear? No, probably not. I want to send you a set of turbo pistons and rods. Wouldn't the L7 cam dictate requiring L7 rockers? No, it doesn't matter. It's just a cam. It doesn't know what rockers are attached to it. It's just that you don't get the lift, and you lose a little bit of duration from it by going to the other rockers by running it with an LS3 head and an LS3 1.7 rockers. You're just going to lose some lift. So you would go from go from 660 to 630, 629. Yeah, there are 172s in the aftermarket stuff. The roller rockers are, we've run those a lot. There. Yeah, Lifeline. I'm excited about Morgan. I'm excited about talking. I'm a big fan of those, and I haven't talked to very many people that have Fireflies and stuff because those are kind of cool. That way, I could be a Pontiac guy because the Sprint is a Chevy one. Firefly is probably a bit more aerodynamic, I think. I think it has a more metro-y body, and I think that does the Firefly have a like a hood scoop on it too? Overbuilt. Somebody's listening, right? 455 Pontiac is a big block. There you go. Uh-oh, he's stirring it up. Stirring it up, Buttercup. Which you prefer for nitrous 6-liter? That there's not a preference between those two. It doesn't matter. You just start out at whatever power level you're at, and then you just add nitrous to that. The 6-liter you can usually make more power because it's bigger with the same kind of modifications. So a bigger motor you can then add more nitrous to because there becomes a limit of how much nitrous you can add based on the naturally aspirated power output, because it'll only process so much. Because as you add nitrous, you start losing airflow. W41. So you want to put a different suspension on there? Mine had Super Richie lowering springs on it. 6-liter requires less to build and more power. Yeah, it just starts out kind of better. some differences. The W41, are you talking about the Olds Calais one? The 442? Because I think that the there. The HO Quad 4. Let's have a. I like the intake manifolds on those because they're just weird enough to be cool, especially the early ones. That was in an 89 Calais. They look like they have headers on them. The W41, 190 horsepower. With a cool fancy red valve cover. There's some differences. The Suzuki bumper and hood are the difference with the Chevy, Pontiac, and Geo. Cool. Turbo Mark II Firefly and Sprint got the hood scoop. It's possible to run Trick Flow 225 top end kit on LS2 GTO with a supercharger, and if so, yes, it's possible to do all of that. Oh, you have one of the quad 4s pertinent? 6 liter or 5.3 for daily use and nitrous. If you have both of them, both of those are good. What's your thought on JE Ford's 4-inch flat top pistons? Slight dish with no valve relief. I think I would rather have a flat top with a valve relief in it so that you could put more camshaft in it. But otherwise, it'll be fine if you just put a camshaft in it that's not going to hit there. You'll find more 4.53s and 6.0s in the wrecking yards. That's surely true. Purchased one of the G42 1200 turbos the other day. Can't wait for it to come to Australia and get installed in my 6 liter. Chris, definitely let me know how it goes. Thanks for the info. What builds of your own do you have going on? An LS Mustang, and then I also have to get the 240Z together, and the Metro. The Metro might get a blower and a turbo on it just because as a G Wiz thing, but the Sprint is going to be the thing. I have a 6 liter board 30 on my last motor that made 460 wheel horsepower through a manual on E85. Had PRC heads, engine 7/8 headers, fast intake manifold, 227, 234. They thought it was an LD9 2.4 at the yard. Would they have sold the other one for more money if they knew what it was? Well, Nick, at 11.8, that's why it makes good power, right? Yeah, Morgan, I will give you a call tomorrow. 4.8, 5.360, all solid engines, even the 5.7. Yeah, those are hard to come by, though. Had a cam 5.3 and a 280Z. Get good suspension tires, you'll need it. What rear end did you have? Did that have an R200 in it? Charge for anything that's rare. I know the LKQ around West Tech is like that too. They have this specialty section now of anything that they think that they can charge more for. I'm still kicking myself for not getting the Cleveland that was there. And on that note, it is time to go. I'll see you guys all tomorrow. Tomorrow. Not yet. Chris, do you have any R200s? If you do, let me know, man.